12 years, I think, but I've been on the stress management for over 50 because I was in chronic pain and had to manage my own journey there with a sort of swimming upstream because the doctors that diagnosed me all told me that I wouldn't be able to heal from chronic pain, and that was their viewpoint. Fortunately, I had a science background, and I knew that they were operating in a scientific paradigm and that paradigms shift. And I also knew that when they said you cannot heal from chronic pain, that they were making a pronouncement, and there are no facts in science. Science is all probabilities. They could have said it's probable that, but they didn't. They made a pronouncement. So I knew they'd made an error there. The other thing was science can only talk about that which it can observe, measure, and describe. It can't talk about anything outside of that. But we live in the all that is, and we heal in the all that is. So I knew that they were telling me, I knew I was going to have to reference the all that is outside of that framework in order to find healing that they weren't able to see. And I also knew that they were telling me more with that pronouncement. They were telling me more about the limitations of the model they were working under than they were telling me about the body's ability to heal. So that really put me on a trajectory of holistic healing.
So when you say holistic healing, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so referencing mind, body, and spirit. Um, the Western medical model is a reductionist model. I had a back injury and which needed a lot of surgery, and they kept looking at they kept looking at my spine, at this break in my spine, that this instability, and we I had a bunch of surgeries um, to finally stabilize that, but the pain was still there, and they kept looking at that. They just assumed, first of all, they just assumed I wouldn't heal. They never asked, why isn't Elizabeth healing? They just assumed I wouldn't. So that's a lot for a patient to have to swim against. The other thing is, in the chronic pain situation, this is what we find. You could have three patients that have back x-rays that look just like mine, and one of them will have pain all the time, and another one will have pain just when they're stressed, and the other one won't have pain at all. How do you explain that just by looking at the x-ray? You can't. This is the issue with a reductionist model. It's not taking the whole picture into account. So holistic healing recognizes that mind, body, and spirit, you can't separate the two, they're one. And we make sure that we take that into account. So one of the things that the chronic pain doctors, until the last one that I actually found one that understood chronic pain for sure. They didn't they didn't understand that the stress habit that I had, my reaction to stress, was actually causing my pain. And they didn't understand that I had a stress response that was out of balance. And they didn't understand that the drugs that they were giving me to cope with chronic pain were just making that worse. They didn't understand. I'm not saying that they did it on purpose. They just didn't understand. And it really wasn't until, uh, you know, much later in that 40-year period that the doctors finally understood that.
That's tough to go through because the body shows us so much, especially when it comes to trauma. And I remember there was a conversation I had with someone. She is in her early 50s. She works, and she works 10, 12, 14, 16, sometimes 18 hours. Her body is telling her, slow down. I can't function at this rate. But Elizabeth, what happens to a lot of people as we get older is that we have a certain lifestyle that we want to maintain, and we know one way to maintain that lifestyle is money. So she pushed and she pushed and she pushed. Unfortunately for her, her body began to shut down.
Mhm.
And as it began to shut down, it impacted her relationships around her, most specifically her romantic one, because the body will always keep the score, as they say, right?
True.
So, when it comes to the stress that you mentioned, when it comes to the trauma that you mentioned, when it comes to the way the body responds to all of the above,
Mm.
what are some of the indicators that the body would tell us is going on when it comes to stress and trauma?
Oh, well, um, stress and trauma are different, right? We'll just define that really quickly. Trauma is isn't really what happens to you. It's what happens inside of you because of what happens to you, and it's because you're alone with the hurt. So it's unprocessed energy, and it is stressful, but it's kind of different than straight up stress. Stress is we need there's good stress and there's bad stress. We need stress in order to move it. There's eustress, good stress, true stress. We need that to kind of keep our bones strong and our muscles strong and all those things. But the stress response is the thing we really want to zero in on. The stress response is this kind of physiological, biological uh, uh, reaction that we have when we perceive or are in a threat. We see a threat, and the body, the mind body system gathers all these resources to address the threat. The threat's gone, and now the stress response goes back to normal. In chronic pain, the stress response gets stuck in the on position and doesn't go back to normal. You're asking what that looks like and how can we tell? What that looks like is so I call that a brain on chronic pain. Chronic pain being any pain that's felt 15 days out of 30 for 3 months or more. Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. The brain can't tell the difference between one kind of pain and the other. It sends the same, all those things send the same signal to the brain, it hurts. So a brain on chronic pain is one that's hypervigilant. I'm always looking for the threat. I can't relax. Um, there's a pronounced negative mind. We have a slight negative mind anyway, just to kind of keep us safe in the world. But this is like, you're bad, the world's bad, I'm bad. It's this, the negativity really turns into this really phenomenon where the person is either angry at the world or angry at themselves or both. And it's habit. It's a frequency, right? The other part of chronic pain is chaos in the brain. I can't think straight. I don't remember where I just put my keys. Uh, when at my peak before I just before I went into the pain management program, and I could. This is how bad it gets. I could watch a movie at night and the next morning get up and watch it again, and I didn't remember any of it. Chronic pain will affect the memory, the part of the brain that has memory, and it affects the emotions. So that's why it's this negative mind. So those are the symptoms of chronic complaining all the time, or kind of very low self-esteem. Um, it's the result of pushing. It's the result of this stress habit, right? Stress can become a habit. And in the Western world, we're always looking for the next thing. I mean, I'm still working on that habit. Just my goal is to build presence. My old habit is I've got one foot in the past, remembering what I just did. I've got half a foot in the future, what am I about to do? And I've got half a foot in the present. So it's very hard to really operate there because A, it's very stressful, and B, I'm missing three quarters of what's happening in the present moment. Right? So it makes it pretty ineffective, right? So very hard on the nervous system. We're not made, our nervous system is not made to be in chronic stress. Chronic pain, chronic stress, same thing as far as the nervous system. We're not made for that. We're made to address a threat, and the stress response goes back into the off position. We move on. Chronic stress, chronic pain is very toxic to us. It creates all kinds of biochemistry like cortisol. It makes our cortisol stress hormone go we're very abnormal. It's very toxic to the system, and we get. I don't know what happened to your friend. I heard what you said was that it affected her relationship, but I can imagine that she may have had some sort of an autoimmune disorder that that may have shown up, or she may have had like a sore back all the time, or she, some kind of it would have expressed somehow in the body as a chronic condition. One of the things, another thing that I learned about Western medicine, traditional Western medicine, which is not the only medicine model, but it's kind of the one that I grew up in, is that they're really good at traumatic wounds, like an automobile accident. They're really good at handling that kind of stuff, and they're good at infectious disease, but they're not so good at chronic stuff, right? So they're just kind of understanding the landscape we're working in. Does that answer your question?
It does answer it, and to give you a little bit more context, the person who I was talking about, she temporarily lost the use of her legs. Um, that's how it showed up, and the body was giving signs for about, according to her, for probably at least 12 months, because she would get tinglings in her arms. Right, every time she'd wake up, why does my arm feel like it's numb, like I slept on it, even though she didn't sleep on it? And then the ability to walk, I don't want to say as a normal person, but to have functioning, to have the lower body function in the way that she wanted it to function. She definitely did struggle with that. The problem that she faced is that prior to all of this, she was very arrogant with her lifestyle and with her finances. So life did humble her. And when it humbled her a lot. And I share that story not necessarily to shame her. It's just sometimes when we're on top of that mountain, we're not looking across from it at people. We're looking down at the people. I am better than you. I am more successful than you. And sometimes I think that's a defense mechanism because if I don't feel so great, what's one of the best ways for me to feel good? I'm going to put Elizabeth down. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
beat you down, right? And we see that in the world today in spades, actually, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to, let's say, trauma being passed down,
Ah.
generation to generation,
Mm-hmm.
ancestral trauma, things like that. What is ancestral trauma and how does it show up in our lives?
Okay. So, great question. Um, Again, I'm going to be very careful with the words here. So, I don't I don't think it's accurate to say we have ancestral trauma, but we carry the effects of unprocessed trauma from the past. The effects. Okay, that's just a little bit of nuance in the language because, like, if my father had some kind of trauma, that doesn't mean I'm going to have the same trauma. That's just not like that. What it means, what they did find, that scientists have found a couple things. They found that Rachel Yehuda and her team did work with populations that had been exposed to the Holocaust and their descendants and people that hadn't, and families that hadn't. And she found that the people that were had been exposed to the Holocaust handle, they process cortisol, that stress hormone, they process that differently. And they're much more susceptible to stressors versus somebody who hasn't, like my family wasn't exposed to that. So, although I had other stressors, but it just with all things being equal, I would have been more resilient. I would have more resilience. So, so that was something that was kind of interesting. So that's some science on that. Recent studies, and I don't remember who did it, but everybody can Google it. Recent studies have shown that stress can also be passed down through the male line through the sperm. So the stresses that men carry get transferred. I don't know the mechanism. I think that would be more study. But they get transferred into the sperm, and as you know, from my point of view, as an energy, as a frequency, right? And then that gets passed on. So now that's interesting to me as a bio. I have a degree in plant science, and I studied ecology, and I've studied environmental, and I've studied evolutionary biology. And so when I see something like that, and I see a trend across the lineage, my question always is, and I don't care what the species is, it's like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter kind of what the living system is. My question always is, what's the evolutionary advantage of that? There must be one, or the information wouldn't keep passing, right? So if we step back and look at this as a forest, and we're not in the weeds here, but we're looking at it as the forest. Life has a way of moving through a system, and it wants to keep life going. Like life will show up, like it always finds a way. Life always finds a way. You look at evolutionary history and all the extinctions and stuff that had happened. Life always finds a way. It's quite extraordinary, and it's a thing. It's a characteristic of life. So when I see information flowing through the system, and I see something in the lineage like what we're talking about, my possible view, I mean, my view from this angle, is that that's the system's best guess at what we're going to have to deal with when we're born. As it moves on, as it moves from one generation to the next, the system is trying to self-correct and get us ready for whatever its best estimate of what we're going to be dealing with. Now, what's kind of cool is that there's a wiggle room in the system. It's a plastic system, which would have to be to adapt. Look at all the different species and stuff. There's this massive permutations and all different kinds of variety. So there's lots of wiggle room in the system. But that's kind of an example of how energy moves through the system, and kind of a reason why. We got to be ready to handle the stressors that we think we're gonna that are likely to be. Again, we're getting back to probabilities that are likely we're gonna meet. Yeah.
So it could be, let's say you have a man and a woman. They were raised in, let's say, harsh conditions. There's poverty within that family.
Mm-hmm.
Now these two get together because they've achieved a certain type of lifestyle, which gives them the ability to have children and raise them because they've taken a step above from where they were.
Mm-hmm.
But that stress of poverty, that stress of not knowing where your food's gonna come from, that gets passed down to their children, so their children is prepared for a lifestyle that their parents are still being impacted by and could be their present future once they enter the world, but doesn't have to be their future of themselves. Would that be
Yeah.
accurate?
It would, and I'll give you an example of that. One of the things that we see in ancestral clearing is when I work with clients, is weight issues. And the first thing that if someone's carrying excess weight and they just can't shake it, no matter kind of what they do, We always work on lack in the lineage. Not enough food, scarcity, whether it's like famine or, but usually it's related to food. And you know, you can look at anybody, really, any of us alive today, and all of our ancestors had issues with one issue or another with food, right? But it's just the people that have, I can't lose weight no matter what I do. We bring in the ancestor clearing and we help them release the burden around, I'm not gonna, there's not enough food for me, I need to eat, kind of thing. And they we have reports, anecdotal, but they're reports that their weight equalizes again. It's just an example.
So if I were to take that energy and that trauma that needs to be cleared, and it doesn't necessarily mean that what my parents went through, I'm going to go through, but maybe the effects will impact me as I grow up. Abusive homes. I see the abuse in the home for the age of 5. As I grow and I approach teenage years, I become aware of it. I'm like, this seems kind of odd because when I go to play with Claire and Tommy down the street, I don't see that family dynamic. Now I get of age and I have a relationship of my own. Those effects may or may not, there's a probability that those effects will show up in my relationships because of what I went through. Would that be accurate as well?
It can be, and I would say it depends on the level of consciousness. So I have a general operating principle. Everyone's doing the best they can with the information they have at hand and the consciousness they have at the time. So, an example from my background would be my mother grew up in a her formative years, those first 5 years, grew up in her father was alcoholic, and there was fighting, and there was abuse, and we have records of that. And then they got divorced and so on. But my mom had enough, was traumatized enough, and had no tools to clear that. Right? She had no tools really. That when it came to raising my brother and I, the same thing happened. There was just a lot of abuse, and there was alcohol involved. So I mean, this is just a, like, it's so easy when you're uncomfortable to just reach for a bottle, right? It's because it's freaking on every block, right? And it's like legal. So that was something that, and then in my family, I remember starting at the age of 14. I remember starting. I was allowed to drink, and I started drinking. By the time I was 17, I knew alcohol was not my friend, and I quit. I knew I was going to, I was sitting on the couch. I'm serious. I'm sitting on the couch. It's 11 o'clock in the morning. I've got a beer in my lap. I'm looking at my favorite tree outside. I don't care about my favorite tree anymore. That was enough for me that was like an aha moment. I went, oh my God, I'm going to turn in my mother and my grandfather. Boom, quit alcohol. My brother also in recovery from alcohol. So I'm just saying, like, somehow my brother and I, we kind of got back in, we got into that frequency, but we had the grace of God, the waha moment, the lightning strike, whatever, to pull ourselves out of it. Whereas my parents, they died proximally of alcohol poisoning.
What role then, Elizabeth, do you think our trauma plays in us using external things such as alcohol or even substance abuse to soothe ourselves and find happiness?
That's the perfect question. I love you asked that question. We'll go back to the original um, definition that we used about what trauma is. Trauma is not what happens. It's not what happens to you. It what happens inside of you because of what happens to you, and because you're alone with the hurt. And what is that? We lose our authentic self. Now we're starting to, because we're alone with the hurt, and we've got this unprocessed, really uncomfortable energy, and we can't share it. Now we're in this place of disconnection. And so now we're not just disconnected from others because we can't share it. Now we're disconnected from, maybe from source, right, from God or whatever you want to call creator. Now we're disconnected from ourselves. So now I can't even hear my own authentic voice anymore because uh, I'm so overwhelmed, overtaken by the effect of the trauma that I was in. And I had about 14 or 15. I had a very traumatic experience, and I became so dysregulated I couldn't think straight. I, I mean, I remember that, and I didn't have any help with it, and so it took years for me. Finally, I was able to kind of work with that, but um, it's very dysregulating. We can't, and when we get like that, all we're doing is defending our territory. Think about it. The nervous system cannot, we can't run and digest at the same time. We can't fight and heal at the same time. We have to rest and digest in order to heal. All right, that's kind of that's the way that works. Well, the other part of that is we can't defend and connect at the same time. So if I'm defending my, existence, like I'm not connecting to you. I'm not actually even connecting to God. I'm certainly not connected to my authentic self because I'm busy defending. So, and think about that in terms of today's collective energy, how much defending is going on, right? It's just kind of an example of collective trauma that we've carried for many generations. It's been un it's been unlooked at. It's been there's been no reconciliation collectively for the stuff that's gone down,
If
right?
I were to look back in my teens, when I was in high school, I was skinny, short, and no woman would ever look at me once, let alone twice. Right? I then grew up thinking that I wasn't attractive enough physically. I was smart enough, I did well in school, but physically I felt that I wasn't attractive enough. So one of the ways that I did so was I was going to make sure that the shell, my body, was attractive enough because my judge, my reward, my recognition was external things. Girl looked at me, I felt good. Girl looked at me, I got validation. The attention and the validation at that age was important because I wasn't getting it at home and
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't getting it anywhere else because the love was conditional. As long as I continued to get straight A's, people in my family paid attention to me.
Mm-hmm.
But back then, nobody liked the nerds, right? So what I did was I worked on that. And let me tell you, Elizabeth, the first time I got a compliment from a female, I felt I hit the jackpot because it was the first time, right? That someone said, "Oh, you look good, Train."
Mm-hmm.
And there was a period of time where I took that and I ran with it. It built up my confidence, it built up my value, built up my self-worth. That was my addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Was the compliments. That was my substance that I was using. That was the bottle of compliments that I continued to drink because I would stay up at night and continue to drink from that bottle of compliments. What I found speaking to other men who are my age now and asking them about their experience when they're in their teenage years is they had a similar experience. And then I began to look at things. I said, it's interesting to see how women of that age and maybe men of that age, of course, would have different experiences, but a lot of men didn't feel good about their bodies. And sometimes we think that's what women go through, but it's across the board, right?
Yes, women
Men and
definitely.
women go through these issues, probably for different reasons, but they go through with it, to your point, right? So I began to ask women about their experiences. And those who weren't overweight or who weren't viewed as overweight, they felt that the attention was too much because they didn't want to be only valued based off their body,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where you have men, give me the value for my body,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So I provide that context because I asked the men and the women who I asked this question, how did you want to be valued? And what do you think your self-worth was? A lot of the people wanted to be valued for who they were internally,
Mm-hmm.
not the shell. And as a result, their value, their self-value was impacted negatively by that. We talked about the alcohol, we talked about the substance use.
Mm-hmm.
How does self-worth and self-value impact the choices that we make in our life when it comes to pursuing happiness?
Oh boy. Well, I want to go back to where we talked about trauma again, right? Traumas that 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 thing that we're doing. We're looking to the external world for our validation, for our we've lost our connection to our true self, which is the well within that we can always tap with. This is the problem with having unresolved trauma, is that we lose track of our true self, our the divine within, the light here, and we're always looking for it out there. And we live in a society where uh, if you're paying attention to the media is constantly saying, "You need this product. You know, you can't live without this thing. You know, go look over here. You know, look over there." And so we're trained from the beginning, before we're teenagers. Really, we're trained to look out there for our whatever, and it actually takes, this is why it's helpful to have a spiritual community, a spiritual family, a spiritual orientation, because a spiritual orientation is going to begin with creator is in here, and we're looking in here for the answers. My best teachers have turned me right back to me. They don't want me looking at them. They're like, no, don't look at me, look at you, right? So this is the fundamental problem in any kind of addiction, is we're looking out there to fill this well, which actually doesn't need to be filled. We've just forgotten that it's already full. I don't know if that made any sense, but I'm just
No,
kind
I
of
think so because you mentioned it, right? Like because it's either we get it internally or we get it externally. You could do both as long as you have that healthy balance. But how many people out there are people pleasers? How
yeah.
many
Well, that
people
would be
out there
yeah. That's codependence.
codependency,
Yeah,
right? How many
yeah,
people, every person they get is a narcissist? How many people, when they look out into the world, they see trauma in different forms? Because every person, to your earlier points, who are very negative, everywhere they look, they see an oppressor. They see a reminder of the person
yeah,
that made them feel like they were less than,
yeah, yeah,
right? How difficult of a life is that to always see indicators of your trauma wherever it is
yeah.
you go?
Well, one of the things that is helpful for me as again, looking at the larger picture, and I've always been a history geek, talk about nerds. That was, science and history were my things. Um, you talk about oppressor energy. The oppressor was oppressed. The oppressed turned into oppressors. So we've got it all of it in. We've got all of us. Each one of us has both those energies in us. Now, here's the thing: are we honest enough to address that? That's the thing, right? Are we actually? Can we own up to that? And I'm talking about go back in the lineage, go back in the lineage. So, so in my family, we have generations. We have the records for 12 generations that we actually have like good records for 12 generations. It's kind of remarkable. And we have, and I was one of the things that I work on in my own personal life that I've worked on is my hot button around injustice in the world. And it wasn't like I had a bunch of injustice thrown at me as a kid. I had abuse and stuff, but it wasn't societal injustice. Now I did grow up. I cut my teeth on the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King, so very sensitive to that. Um, but we say if it's hysterical, it's historical. And I had this really hot button, and it wasn't until I got into ancestral clarity that I was able to clear it. And then I went back and discovered that in my family, 12 generations ago, we were persecuted because of our religion. So that's kind of interesting. And then you look a little more closely at the lineage and you see we weren't we came to America and we were anti-slave, but we did get involved. Our family did get involved in the war machine. So supplying ammunition and stuff. So that's like the whole other, that's oppressor energy somewhere else, right? So it's like we were oppressed and we oppressed, and you can just see it in the lineage. That's just an example, but does that make sense?
That example you just gave makes fantastic sense because it reminds me of someone that I used to know on Instagram when I had Instagram. She was in a difficult marriage, and when it ended, every person she dated after that, she treated just like how she was treated. She was very disrespectful emotionally. And this is something that she says. So, if she's admitting to it, it's probably worse, right? Because we usually try to make us look not too bad, right? So she was disrespectful emotionally, she was disrespectful verbally, and she was disrespectful sexually. And the part that stands out sexually is, if I remember correctly, they weren't having sex often based on their standards, right? I'm not going to use my standards based on their standards.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a disconnection of intimacy. And if anyone knows, when you're in a relationship, that's tough to accept because it usually indicates that there's a disconnection emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there's something before it gets to that point. So when that marriage ended, she went out and was intimate with a number of people, but she was dominant and disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're done. Get out. Okay, we're going to do it this way. Don't call me. Right? And men out there, don't hate me for this because men and women have this type of energy, very masculine energy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm going to dominate you. We're going to do it this way, and then
Well,
you're going to go home.
I wouldn't necessarily call that masculine energy. I think that's a diss to the masculine. I would call it unbalanced, but I would call that in the energy of insecurity and unresolved trauma. She had some kind of trauma that created, massive self esteem within her that she never, and I just wouldn't put that on one feminine or masculine energy. I wouldn't do that, because I think there's a difference. I think, yeah. So I'm just saying like a little nuance there, but I get it, and it makes sense to me. If she had been able to be in a position where she could have addressed the core issue, that stuff wouldn't have continued. She would have found a healthy relationship.
Yeah, I think if she was able to, and I think you're right. Like, you know what? Well, we won't say it's masculine energy. We'll just say that she wasn't balanced
Yeah.
in the way she was pursuing things, and also to your point, there was some insecurities because maybe she felt that she had to offer that because she wasn't getting it,
You know. Yeah.
right? And it's like a man that has a lot of money, sometimes he'll lead with the money. Like, I'm this rich guy, look at my nice suit, let's go to this fancy restaurant. right? What you lead with, sometimes you get judged by, and
Hmm.
sometimes what you lack, you get judged by. So
Hmm.
it is a tough place for anyone to be in, especially if you don't catch it, right? To your point, when you're hurt, for some people, for them to get over the hurt, they gotta go hurt someone else.
Yeah, well, that's the insecurity that's the trauma that hasn't been resolved. That it's showing up as insecurity, and so you hurt me, now I'm going to hurt you. That's the imbalance, right? This is why we have to do our in. This is an inside job. It's not an outside. It's an inside job, right?
What do you think are some of the ways that we can identify that imbalance?
Well, you gave a great example of it just now. I got hurt. Now I'm going to hurt you. And again, we talked about blaming energy, that chronic pain tendency when we have chronic pain, which is again emotional, chronic emotional. 3 months out of 12 weeks, you know, long enough with chronic pain, emotional pain, you're gonna start blaming people. You're gonna have a self-esteem problem. You're gonna get chaos in the brain, and it's really a reactive behavior. It's not We're not able to be conscious because we're so busy defending. We're in that reactive part of the brain. We're not really connecting into the executive thinking anymore. We're just reacting to the world, trying to keep ourselves in defense mode. Anyway, yeah. So it's kind of that basic frequency of I'm protecting my territory no matter what, however that shows up. You can feel the energy of it once you kind of know what to look for.
That energy of trauma, that energy of imbalance, how does it then affect the way that we talk to ourselves?
You know, you're talking to a yoga teacher, right? So you say something like that, and I go right into like the breath, right? So the nervous system is is affected by the you said the mind, right? You're talking about the mind, but the mind is affected by the nervous system. The mind follows what the nervous system is up to. So if my nervous system is dysregulated, the mind is going to be twitchy. I call it twitchy, and we can mediate that by learning how to actually leverage the power of the breath to influence the nervous system and calm it down. Right? So, so, so I know during the day that when my mind starts getting twitchy, or I start acting kind of moving quickly, and my mind starts getting twitchy, and I start going, oh, I shouldn't even be on this podcast. Like that's now I've gone into my old stress habit, right? I know that my breath now is short and ragged because I've been in this work long enough. So I pause and I take a nice long deep breath, extend that exhale, do that 4 or 5 times, and I feel the whole nervous system calm down. And now I'm back into regular Elizabeth land instead of my old stress habit. Right? So the answer to your question is we got to learn to regulate our nervous systems. And the way we do that is we get into some kind of a breath work class and learn how to leverage the power of the breath. Now, whether that's through yoga or straight up breath classes, just there's lots of breath work classes out there. I think you know this territory, so you'll agree with me. What would you like to say? What would you like to add to this particular part of the conversation? You took us right into this corner.
I think you're setting me up here. How do you know I know about this?
Well, we've sat down a time or two.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a big fan of the self-talk. I'm a big fan of breath work. I'm the big fan of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
For those who know me, know I'm a very happy-go-lucky person. I'm always smiling. I'm always happy. I wasn't always that way, but I learned to be that way. One thing actually I will share with everyone out there is And this is going to sound like a made for home movie, what I'm about to say right now. I just wanted to not be unhappy anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And
Mm-hmm.
people could be like, oh my God, is that it, Train? That's the foundation. And once I realized I had a choice in my happiness,
Mm-hmm.
things took off. And taking a step further, and then once I realized I was in control of my happiness, I was able to see the unhappiness in other people, like this, like the evil spirits in them. I was like, nope, you're possessed by unhappiness. I need to run away from you. Where's my holy water? Let me sprinkle it, because I had to get away from these people, and it was tough because when you adjust the lens, your perspective of the world changes. And when your perspective of the world changes, your perspective of people change. And when that changes, you're going to be like, oh, I knew this person 15 years. What the hell did I gain from knowing this person 15 years besides chaos, drama, misery, whatever? It doesn't mean they're a bad person.
Right.
It just means they're a bad fit for where you're going on your life, because life is a road, right? And there's a street. Happiness to the left, misery to the right. There's your fork in the road. You can go straight and hope and dream for the best. You can go right, which is familiar territory, and your brain knows this, and your brain has gotten used to it. It's like, okay, I know this right path. I haven't died from it. It hasn't killed me. So you may be comfortable going there, but that left path to happiness, that's new territory, baby. And you may be like, Elizabeth, I don't know. Looks kind of dark. It looks kind of lonely down there. You see the light at the end of it, but you don't know if you're strong enough. You don't know if you're worthy enough, and you don't know if you can survive the journey alone. You talked about trauma. We talked about breathwork. We talked about all these things. How scary is it for someone to do that journey and know that there's going to be a lonely one for the beginning of it?
Well, that depends on the person. That's the mind. We have to be very careful about the meaning that we make of things. Um, you said something that I thought might be kind of interesting to bring in. So I said I had chronic pain for 4 decades, and that created a habit, stress habit. Well, most of us have stress habits of one kind or another, and 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 that created when I healed from the physical chronic pain, and I came out of that program, which was like 12 and a half years ago, I realized I still had the stress habit. I didn't have the physical pain anymore, but I had the stress habit that led to it, right? And what I noticed was I had difficulty accessing joy. My nervous system was used to this pain signal. It wasn't used to joyous stuff. And so I was like, well, that's interesting. So I knew I had an imbalance there. Now, if you look at the Yoga Sutras, it's 196 sutras that Patanjali laid out 2,500 plus years ago. In the Yoga Sutras, it tells us that our natural state is joy. So I'm like, okay, how do I get from here to there? And I talked to my son, who's also a trauma, he's a trauma coach. I talked to my son. I said, I'm noticing this thing is happening. And he says to me, joy is a skill set. Joy is a skill set. And I'm like, what? Joy is a skill set? Yoga tells us that joy is our natural state. How do we get from our natural state to like joy is a skill set? Like, how does that? And I realized that what Master, when my son was right in the middle there, he was saying, and this is what yoga is about. This is the whole, all the Yoga Sutras point to this and explain this. Yoga helps us, and work like it helps us clear the blocks that we have so that then we can experience joy. So the work around happiness is like, what am I holding on to that's blocking me from that experience, the normal experience? And that's where our work is. Does that make sense?
It does. I think I'm going to steal that. Joy is a skill set.
Yeah, I know. That was like, but and joy is a skill set, and joy is our natural state. Square that equation. And that's why when I was, because that was the thing that was the challenge to me. Wait a minute, these two things are not the same. Like, how do they connect? And I was like, oh, that's what the work is that we're doing, is to clear ancestral clearing work, yoga, all the things that we do or that inside job. That's what we're doing. We're clearing everything that's in the way of us experience our natural state, which is joy and happiness.
Will that mean that some people won't experience joy?
If they don't do the work, I mean, I had my own. I mean, I had, as a chronic pain sufferer, I had moments where I would laugh and stuff, but I didn't have the frequency of joy. I went back, that was a momentary thing. I would just slip right back into life is hard. Like that. I just slip right back into life is hard. So that was kind of my baseline frequency, because it was. And I didn't know, I just didn't have the tools at that time. I got the tools later, but I didn't have the tools at the time to shift that.
That's tough. That is so tough. Like if you don't have the tools, like imagine growing up and your mother, your father, your parents would tell you do X, Y, and Z and you'll be happy. And you do X, Y, and Z and you are not happy.
Bingo.
Right? And then you're like, okay, what how can I find joy? You go back to your parents. Continue to do X, Y, and Z and you'll find joy. And you're like, okay, I'm 30, I'm 40, I'm 50. This joy thing doesn't seem to be something I could obtain. Someone comes along and they say, Elizabeth, I have joy in this box. Do you want it? Of course you do. I spent 20, 30 years trying to find this joy. But there's a catch, and there's always a catch. You have to do X, Y, and Z. So now, as a child and as an adult, you're being told that you have to perform a certain way to get this joy that's fleeting because it's external.
Exactly.
But it was always supposed to be internal.
It's here. Yeah.
Why do you think we are still confusing it between internal and external joy?
Oh, well, I will tell you that my orientation as a child, I'm coming from the West, right? And my particular orientation was is that God's out there. Now there was a discussion of like Jesus and the light, but God was always out there. So, like, and God was all powerful and loving and vengeful, wrathful. And, as a little kid, I'm like, well, which is it? Like, God is schizophrenic, right? So that was a very, I felt like my grounding was very, uneven and not predictable there. And so that as a foundation was very difficult. That's not everybody, but I actually maintain, from stamping back on a larger, like from the larger view, I maintain that because we're no longer in the tribal vibe, that we're in this segmented non-tribal vibe. We're not in community. We don't raise one another in community, and we don't surround. We don't have the Ubuntu vibe where everybody supports everyone else. This creates huge separation issues, and so that this is ultimately if God is out there, separate from me, now I've completely forgotten who I am. That's kind of my answer to that.
Could then that lead to a loss of identity and an identity crisis for some people?
Definitely, definitely. Well, you look at if you just look at at the wars in the world, none of those people have joy. Like that's not the vibe, right? So we really have to kind of come back to the garden, which is right here, and stop, referencing the external world. And that takes, that is this is the thing that my experience. I wasn't raised in a tribal community, but I have studied indigenous culture, and I hang in BIPOC communities that are bringing that in, and that's the big thing that I'm noticing is like we really got to get back to tribal living, to the community vibe where there's that support, because the community points us right back to ourselves, and we're mirroring one another in that space. I don't know if you know that much about tribal stuff, but it's a completely different vibe than what we have in America or in the West.
Can you explain the differences?
Well, I kind of tried to say it originally, like children in a tribal community are raised communally, so that the mother can get a break from the kids. She can go, that everyone takes care of everyone else, and in in those tribes that are healthy, the the when someone has like a mental there's a mental health problem, the community surrounds them. They're not exiled, right? They're not exiled, right? And so there's just a different orientation. Everyone shares stuff. There's no I've got more than you. It's just a completely different competition isn't a thing. Um, there's respect for the elders, uh, but and they set the stage. But anyway, that's just kind of a. I wish I had actually lived in one of those because I could enunciate it better. But I know that the society that I was lived in, like we didn't know our neighbors, or if we did, we judged them. you know, like and and there was a lot of competition. And I'm in this neighborhood, but you're in that neighborhood, and oh, he lives on the other side of the tracks. I mean, wow. I mean, that's just an example of countless versions of separation, the wound of separation that we experience as little ones. We grow up in that, and somehow, if we can become conscious enough to see what we're up to, we can change that. But we have to be able to see that we're in the wound in order to begin to heal the wound. And we have to heal it within ourselves first.
I look at there's an article that was talked about the happiest countries in the world. And usually it's Scandinavian, right? Like you have your Finland, Sweden, and things like that. And the things that they value, to your point, is usually community and family,
That's right.
right? And this is an indicator of, and they rank the countries. Canada, where I am, United States, a lot of Western countries don't rank well in comparison to that because the community part, the family part, isn't necessarily a primary thing. It's not something that's on top of people's minds. Sure, we love our families, but there's a sense of individuality that seems to trump, for lack of a better word, a lot of other things that go on in our lives. So it's to your point when it comes to community and to happiness, it starts from within, and then you build that community within yourself, and then by extension, you're building it with your neighbors or whomever else. In this part of the world, it's I'm going to build my happiness through the toys that I get. And the more toys that I get means that Elizabeth, Turing, and everyone else has less toys. So
Hmm.
as I'm driving in my Ferrari and you're driving in your Honda Civic, I should feel happier because I have what you don't have. Whereas
Hmm.
that person in the Honda Civic, they'd be like, I go home every night, I have food in my belly, roof over my head, and I have a partner that loves me. I'm not only happy, I'm content.
Well,
And I
that's
think
the
so many people are missing the contentment of life too.
yeah, that's the illusion of happiness. That's not actual happiness, right? Right.
Hey,
Yeah.
sometimes a fantasy for a lot of people is definitely better than reality.
Well, that's true, but we do need to. I feel like the truth is very healing. If we can actually, you know, be truthful with ourselves, we have a better shot at healing.
Why do you think people are lying to themselves? Or why do you think some people do lie to themselves?
It's more convenient. Um, I have a friend who Nikki Myers, who's just an amazing human being and beautiful teacher on codependence. She founded Yoga 12-Step Recovery. She says denial is don't even know I'm a liar. There's an
I don't
answer
even
to
know
that
I'm
question.
alive. Oh,
Don't even
wow.
know I'm a liar. Yeah, denial. Yeah, and I that was one of the things that was one of my coping mechanisms as a child when my mother would just rage and freak out, which was on a daily basis. I just didn't know when. Um, I would my kind of thing was react, hold it all together, and what's the next thing? It wasn't that bad. So I learned denial at a very young age, and it wasn't until I heard Nikki say, "Denial, don't even know I'm a liar," that I realized how I had set myself up in that frequency for my life, right? So we lie to ourselves to survive.
To survive external, or internal conflicts, or both.
Safety. The number one directive of any organism is safety, survival, and so we've got to address. That's again we're hitting the nervous system. We're going right at the level of the nervous system, and the nervous system needs to feel that it's safe in order to be able to even be regulated. In order to connect, there has to be a sense of safety first.
So if I don't feel safe with myself, I won't feel safe in the world.
Yeah. If you don't trust yourself, good luck with that. Yeah.
And if I don't feel safe in the world,
You're going to be
then I won't
dysregulated.
trust, yeah, and I won't be able to trust other people.
Right. Yeah. And you're going to be, you're going to be hypervigilant. You're going to be in that chronic pain state, that chronic stress state where you're always looking for the threat because that's your orientation.
So if I understand this correctly, Elizabeth, then if I grew up in a survival mindset, right? I don't feel safe
Mm-hmm.
everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Like we talked about, we see our oppressor, and eventually some of us go from oppressed to oppressor. If I don't feel safe, I go out into the world and I see an oppressor everywhere I go. I see my
Mm-hmm.
trauma indicators everywhere I go. I'm triggered. Every minute of every day, I'm triggered.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the responsibility would be for me to identify and address that. Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah, but I think again, I think we do that in community because we're traumatized in unsafe relationship and we heal in safe relationship. So you would want to get in a safe community to do that healing work. Yeah, and you said mindset, and I'm not coming from the level of the mind. The mind follows the nervous system. So it's a nerve. If you've got a survival nerves, if you've got a survival mindset, it's because you have a survival nervous system. Your nervous system is set at survive, and now you've got a habit in the nervous system. This is how we do life. We do life hypervigilantly. This is how we do it. And so, in order to, like I said, in order to shift that, you need to get in community with safe people so that you can then do that work. Remember, you can't defend and connect at the same time. And when we're traumatized and we're sitting in that wound, we're defending. And in order to heal from that, we need to be able to connect in safe community. Yeah.
So isolation doesn't work.
No, we're not built for that. No, that's just gonna isolation does not work. Correct.
That's interesting because you'll have people, they retreat and they would
Yeah.
isolate thinking it's going to work.
Well, maybe they're withdrawing from a toxic community and they haven't found a safe community yet.
Hmm.
You
That
do. You
reminds me of
find.
someone. Yeah, that reminds me of someone who they struggled with that. It was simpler, maybe even easier for them to stay around the unsafe and toxic environment because he shared that what if I'm not good enough for the other community that is safe and healthy because they may look at me differently.
Well, that's the wound showing up. That's the mind showing its wound. I mean, I'm just calling it like I see it. That's a belief. That's not necessarily. I mean, that's really trauma kind of showing it's a wound. Because you get an actual safe community, people will attune to you, and now you'll be seen and heard and acknowledged, and you'll begin to be able to connect to other people in a
That's the
safe
problem
way.
I always, yeah, that's the problem I always find with self-fulfilling prophecies is I'm not good enough, so I won't try. I'm
Oh,
not worthy enough, so I'm not gonna try. Like, how impactful or how dangerous do you think limiting beliefs are?
yeah. Oh, well, that's a good one. Yeah. Well, this is why we do meditation. this is why we this is why we do the kind of work we do, because we learn in the meditation process. We learn that I have thoughts, but I am not my thoughts. I am watching my thoughts. This was a big shift for me in chronic pain, where I was like, oh, I'm having an experience of pain, but it's not who I am. It's not my identity. And that was huge for me. That distinction was huge for me. So we this is the value of a meditation practice, is that it reminds us of, like, we're the witness of our experience. We're identifying with being the witness of the experience, not the actual experience itself. And so now we don't have the identity crisis anymore.
I am not my pain. My pain is just part of my journey.
Yeah, I'm just having an experience of it. Yeah.
I gave the example to someone that trauma is, in a lot of times, is a coat. I've been discriminated against as one patch. I've been
Mm-hmm.
harassed as another. Racism is another. And I think sometimes we wear that coat for so long, we have no idea what we look like without the coat on.
100%.
So to
A
your
hundred
point,
percent.
I think that's what people get stuck in is just
Yeah.
this is my identity.
Mm-hmm.
I am Terrain, the man who's been abused. I'm Terrain, the man who was raised without his parents. I'm Terrain, the man that his grandmother passed away. Instead of dropping those things and saying that I am just Terrain, the man.
Uh-huh.
Um, how comfortable do some people maybe get in the trauma? And they continue to wear it as the coat, and it just represents everything about their identity and their life.
Well, I think you're describing a brain on chronic pain, a person on chronic pain, if they're sitting in that. I'll tell you this, on my own experience, because I was I was really affected by the history of my family, and it was a burden for a long time until I really got into ancestor clearing and was able to release some of that burden. But the other thing I did was I sat one summer and asked this question: who would I be without the story of my family? Now, I took that on as an inquiry, and let's get truthful and real for a minute. The past has momentum. The mind remembers stuff. We've got a memory. So the past has momentum. It imprints our present moment experience. But what we do with that, with the present moment, is where the power is. So what meaning am I making in this moment about the story of my family? And what meaning am I making in this moment about my identity. And so like I got to the point where I was like, oh, okay, I have this family history, but I don't have a charge around it anymore. I just know that I have it, but I was able to work with the identity that I had taken on, and with all the things in my life, to the point where it's like, oh, these things happen, but they're not running my nervous system anymore. They're just a memory. That's kind of my answer to that question. Yeah.
Elizabeth, let me ask you one final question before I let you go today. Yogi to yogi. When it comes to clearing out the trauma, what are three things you wish people knew about the benefits of that process and why?
Oh, okay. Uh, well, one is, as I said, the past has a momentum, but we can redirect that through the present moment. So understand that the present moment is where the power is. The present moment, the quantum physicists tell us we've got access to the past, present, and future all at once through the present moment. The first Yoga Sutra of the 196 is yoga is now. And all the other sutras flow from that first sutra, yoga is now, and they're pointing to the present moment. Also, when we address the breath, we're now in the present moment. You can't breathe consciously without being present. So really the present moment is the also ancestor clearing accesses the present moment. So we really need to learn to be here and and operate from here instead of, for me, I used to have 1 foot in the past and a half a foot in the future and a half a foot in the present, and I lost track of, I just, as I said when we started, I just couldn't access all the information in the present moment because I was past, present, and future all at once, and not much in the present. So it's really important that we cultivate that. It's where the power is. Also, I would like to say you can find me at my website. I forgot to say that in the beginning. At Elizabeth with a hyphen Kipp.com. You got to put a dash between my first and last name. Elizabeth-Kipp.com. You can find me there. There's all kinds of free resources. All my social media is there, and you can book you can book a session or book a free